There we go. Ta-da! Happy Monday. Welcome back to Reaper Pro Tips with me, your host, Anne, and disembodied sneezing hands, Justin and Quindy, and maybe even John if he's recovered from shipping Kickstarter orders yet. Hey, everybody. We're working on Dead Crimson Herald-y Tentacle Dude today. Sploosh. We're here. We're here. We're here. Another week. Another week where I'm alone in the home. I do get a lot more done since David went back to work. I hate to say it. I hate to admit it, but I do. And I would start on time if Justin hadn't been sneezing his head off. But that's all right. He's sick, so we can just give him sympathy vibes. Let's see here. Just picking out some brushes. Ooh, I want to show you guys my new fat brush. It is Monday, indeed, Julie and Bob, by extension. Yes, indeed. It is a Monday. It is a Monday, but I think I've got my week, like, I've kind of outlined. I feel like I've got it. Like, I'm on it. It's all right. Good morning / afternoon / evening / early morning, depending on where you are. Exactly. Good morning tout le monde. Bonjour tout le monde. Yes, yes, yes. So we're working, remember what we're working with, guys? We're working with the Gloom and Grave Fast palette colors with a couple of the Dark Reach colors tossed in for good measure. Because we wanted to work with new colors on this model. And I'm actually really happy with how he is starting to turn out. But I am going to block in his actual green, I think, on his tentacles today. So I'm going to need our Grave Gloom, which is a really cool color. And probably a little bit of our Troglodyte Tan to warm it up. And then to lighten it, we need our Vampire Pallor. We're going to put aside our red colors today. Although I may bring the purple back because I may do purpley color on the tips of the tentacles. I think that sounds like fun. So really the red is probably the one we're not working with today. Thank you for the resub, Carrie Michael Cosby. 13 months. It's the unlucky or lucky, depending on which culture you ascribe to. It's either a magic number or an unlucky number, depending on what you... how you wish to see it. And isn't that life for you? All right, so we've got our Death Knight Black. I feel like I am going to use Death Knight Black for this. Blues and purples are actually really good shaders for greens of all kinds in general. The thing that's going to make this a little bit different than usual, though, is that this has a lot of white in it. You can tell because of how light it is. And Death Knight Black has black in it. So when we mix these, we're going to get more of a washed out shadow. But with shadows, that's okay. If your shadows are a little desaturated, as we call it, a little grayed out, and not as bright, that's all right. But yeah, just for the record, blue and purple, both of which are in Death Knight Black, are both great shaders for greens of all sorts. I particularly like, and like I said, we could use purple. We could use the Necromancer Purple as our shader instead, except that I want to use this on the tips of the tentacles. So we're gonna put that aside for later. We're gonna mix up our colors. We're gonna put our dude in focus. Quindy, that's funny. Isn't that how it happens? That is how it happens. Coworkers are like that. Coworkers be like that. Ooh, that's right. I was going to show you guys. I finally got a big fat brush. David saw this come out of the packaging and he's like, ooh, what's that? I'm like, no, mine. So I've been wanting a big brush, but it's been so hard to find Raphael's, but I finally found a Raphael on Amazon. It was actually labeled as a regular Klinsky, but I noticed that it had the Raphael logo and everything. So, like, let's get this. There we go. Raphael logo. It's a size 3, as you can see. It's an 8404. So it's the difference between series of brushes, as they call them, is usually the shape. So, like, when you have a Winsor & Newton Series 7, what Series 7 means, it's their regular Kolinsky round shape. Here is the brand new brush. I'm not even going to take its tubule off. But this is my previous very large brush, right? This is the Raphael size 1. Here, let's give you guys some comparisons. Here is my Da Vinci Maestro. And then, of course, there's Tiny Brush. Tiny Brush. So this new brush on the left, this is my new brush. It's immense. Hello, Gent. Thanks for that Prime resub. Dang, you are almost on a 24 months. That's insane. That's insane. But yes, so this is my giant big fat brush. And so, as I was saying, the series matters regarding shape. So with Raphael, with this brand of brush, you've got two series, 8404 and 8408. And the 8404 is actually their standard round, and their 8408 is their pointed round. Can you see the difference? Look at how much more tapered and finer pointed this one is. This one still has a killer point, don't get me wrong, but see how much thicker. Like if I put my finger over that part of the brush, you can see how much more narrow the point is on this one and how much thicker and wedge-shaped the point is on that. In fact, this one is very similar to my Escoda. That's more of a miniatures, what they call a miniature size. When you see a miniature size on a brand, it usually doesn't mean that it's for miniatures. It usually means that it's this wedge shape. So it's thicker at the bottom, it's shorter, and it's more pointed at the tip. Yeah, this is huge, huge brush. Biggest brush I will ever have used for miniature painting, but this is what I wanted. I want it for blocking in big figures like busts. Like essentially doing a fast job like we did on Noel, if you guys remember. Noel went very fast. I wasn't even using my biggest brush for Noel. I was using kind of a crappy, beat up, bigger brush. I was using my crappy brush of doom. I wanted something big, but that still had a fine tip so that I could actually hit the details while I was doing stuff. I would have the capability to do some fine work. So yes, I am super excited about my silly, expensive, very, very cool brush. And yes, excited to use it. I have I went in on brushes lately. I decided I wanted to experiment with a lot of different shapes. Because, you know, every once in a while you want to mix it up. Nah. I actually like precision and quality work Shadow Raven. Yeah, I went there. Shots fired. Ed knows I give him crap. I wanted something in between. Oh yeah, because size 1 and 0 are the prime miniature painting sizes. Well, and it was even hard to find a 2. Like, I originally wanted a 2. I ended up with a 3 because I was like, well, that's probably still going to be okay because Raphael has such a good tip. You know? So I'm like, I don't care if it's a gigantic chunky brush as long as it's got a really fine tip. And this is what I always tell you guys, is the size of the brush doesn't matter. Does it have a really, really good tip? The only thing the size of the brush influences is how much paint it's going to load up, like how much paint it can carry. And that has a direct relationship to what thinness or thickness of paint you like to use. So if you use a lot of really thin paint, you don't want to use a giant chunky brush like I just got. What giant chunky brush is for is using wet palette and fast blocking in highlights, shadows, and midtones on larger models. So, but I paint a lot of larger models now. So essentially what I'm doing is I'm switching up my style again. Because it's fun. So Templar Lady may be the last one I paint, or Templar and Halfling may be the last models I paint in my old style. Because now I'm transitioning to what I was doing with Noel. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to do all the fine detail and stuff. I'm just going to start the model differently. I kind of want to start very loose at the beginning. Yeah, you went there, Shadow Raven, but we're just going to keep this a family-friendly show. Alright. Let's see here. I need to mix up my green. I kind of want to mix up an intermediate shade, too, between the green and the Death Knight Black. I do like this Death Knight Black, though. For those of you who were on my private stream last week on Thursday, you saw me using it as a kind of a blender, a glazing tool over my Halfling's cape. Oh, thank you, Alba Vazen. You have been subbed for 22 months. You are another one who is almost to a double sub-anniversary, which is terribly exciting. We know we've been around for a while at that point. I'm going to go 3 drops of this green, guys, and only 1 drop of the Death Knight Black for my mix. The reason is that I know, like, you just know, when you look at this delicate green color, that all the black in this is going to hit it like a sledgehammer. So you get a sense for this over time. But in general, if it's not a really rich color, if it's like got some white in it, if it's more of a delicate washed out hue, when you hit it with anything that has a lot of black in it, like a liner, like Death Knight Black, it's going to really, really hit it hard. It's just like when you've got a really transparent color that has zero white in it and you hit it with pure white. It's just like, boom, it hits it. All right, let me get my mixing brush out. I've got all these fancy new super special brushes. I do not want to corrupt them by mixing with them, much as I was really bad about that for so many years. I'm trying to switch up my habit now. Get in the habit of looking for my mixing brush. Morning, Dogfather. It is going, Rascal. I got a new super gigantic brush to use. I was just showing everybody my super fancy gigantic brush. It still has a killer point on it. So I bet you know what? This is a 3, guys. It's a huge 3. I bet you I can still do eyes with this. On 28s. Betcha anything. It might take some work. But I bet I could do eyes with it. Yeah, when you're not done with your miniature and you have to divert the players with something enticing to distract them. And that always backfires, like, because players are notorious for being distracted when you don't want them to be, and then for not being distracted when you really need them to be. I will prove it eventually. We're not there yet. This guy's eyeball isn't fair game. All right, I think I'm going to drop another drop. It's really warm in here today. It's actually pretty toasty here in Mountain View, California. It was in the 80s yesterday. It's going to be in the 80s again today. So I am going to add an extra drop of water to my paint on my palette. If you work in a very arid environment, this is something also that you want to look at doing. I'm going to mix a little bit more of this Death Knight Black into the screen. I like this green that I'm getting. Just preemptively thin your paint a little bit more. You know it's going to dry out a bit, so... The challenge, Dogfather, is that you want a little bit thinner paint to do eyeballs usually, and so when you've got a monster brush like that, you've got to unload the heck out of it, because it's going to sop up so much paint when you dip it in there. And that paint is going to become impossible to control on a micro level unless you unload. Since my regular Raphael takes like 20 dabs to unload, I'm thinking this thing's going to take like 40 dabs to unload, which is just going to be insane, which is why I say when you're doing super fine control work with thin paint like textures, switch to the tiny brush. The tiny brush will help you do these horrible tiny details with thin paint. And you won't have to spend 20 years unloading it. We did determine that Kirill's crazy Russian brush does indeed do crazy Kirill stuff better than American brushes or European brushes, however. So I may have to actually buy another one. It was better at doing the textures that I needed. Hello, Karoo. For my halfling. Oh, speaking of that, hey guys, guess what? It's about 6 weeks to ReaperCon. Get going on your entries. I want to see entries. I am also going to be getting going on my entries. When I was in the shower this morning, because you remember things when you're in the shower, of course, you're like, oh crap, ReaperCon is just around the corner. Lead tonics, it depends on how much texture you want. Because tiny dots, you know, when you're stippling, sometimes you want just kind of the suggestion of texture, and sometimes you want really, really to see all of your little dots. I usually start with a 2-to-1 paint to water, and then just kind of slowly increase the water. Test it too, like use a piece of like watercolor card like I've got. Put down your background color, mix a 2-to-1, and start stippling on it, and then adjust your water until you hit it. But yeah, 2-to-1 is where I start most of my mixes, and then I just kind of work it down from there, depending on the results I'm getting. You can usually tell in the first couple of brush strokes or the dabs that you're, getting it or not getting it. Also make sure you are unloading your brush a lot so that your dots are controlled and not blobs. You have 6 weeks, Holly? Oh, you probably have lots of work to do though, don't you? Like, because you actually paint for work, like I do. I have to, like, find time. I have to make time. Are you working on any commissions you could enter? Because that's always the sneaky way to do it, right? If you do stuff for money, is to ask the client if they mind if you enter it in a competition. And usually most clients are like, "Ooh, that'd be cool. Tell me if I win," you know, that kind of thing. Whoa, 23 months, so close. Wafer thin mint closeness from Nomad Zeke. Oh, normal full-time job. Oh, yeah. That's a bummer, Holly. Well, you know, if there's anything that you've gotten, like, partially done or mostly done that you could toss on. I mean, I'd love to see one of your pieces, so. I mean, you can always bring something that you just haven't entered also. Like an older piece, but that you're still happy with, that you just have never entered in MSP Open. It doesn't have to be fresh work. It's just we always love to see fresh work. All right, so I've mixed myself a triad here, didn't I, guys? Look. So we mixed in, and actually Vampiric Pallor, since it is a green-white, is a perfect highlight color for this wonderful Grave Gloom color. So perfect. I thought I might need some troglodyte tan, and I actually didn't, so I'm going to pop that back in there. The last thing I'm going to do is get out some Necromancer Purple. Oh, don't though. I mean, for MSP Open, Holly, it's just such a relaxed competition because it's not like a 1, 2, 3. It's not a top-down competition. I think Rhonda just did a PDF over on her Patreon about different types of painting competitions, and we're a juried show, so we are the open system, and if it warrants an award, it gets an award. So I guess it's all about whether you want to push yourself. Like, if that's your thing, then I totally get it, because that's why I like to enter competitions, is to push myself, because otherwise, you know, I'd be lazy. Six weeks. I know, Iffy, that's kind of my thought, too. I'm like, oh no, I have to finish Halfling. Oh no, I have to finish, you know, I have to maybe finish Null. I wanted to finish Templar, but Templar is just going to be a pain because she's, like, super high-end. So we'll see. I'm not going to force myself. So this Necromancer Purple is pretty transparent. I'm not going to force myself to, like, stress out over it or anything, but I want to get at least one thing done. Well, I mean, 6 weeks. You can paint something new from Bones 5 in 6 weeks if you worked on it, like, half an hour a night, easily. So the Necromancer Purple is a beautiful, beautiful color that you all should absolutely adore and get instantly if you don't get it at ReaperCon. But it is a bit transparent, and I want it to pink out or purple, slightly purple out. So I'm going to add a tiny bit of white. Now, remember what I said about how hard the black hit that green? Well, this is a color that has 0 white in it. So even a tiny bit of white has a huge impact on it. So when you see those more transparent, more vibrant colors, you know that when you add white, it's gonna, you know, flux pretty hard. It's gonna change. So that means if you want it to stay close but get a little bit more coverage, you want to just use a little bit more of your initial paint and just a touch of white. So I'm going to add a couple more drops of the Necromancer Purple in there. That's going to thicken the paint also. It's going to bring it back closer to the Necromancer Purple, though. And then I can decide whether I want to take it up a little lighter. Oh, it's Sidewinder. It's an in-person competition only. It's unlike trying to think of a show that's like it, but this one is actually an in-person painting competition, unlike some of Reaper's other stuff that's all online. But this is the big one for ReaperCon, so we do it all in person. So you do have to go to the con, and you enter at the desk where they take a photo of your mini, and then everything hypothetically does go eventually up on our website. But yeah. Every other painting competition that Reaper ever runs, Sidewinder, you can enter. So it's this one that is, like, in person at the convention. But running an online competition has its own challenges, so, like, getting quality photos and everything like that. And then some people, you know, you always have the risk of people photoshopping stuff and things like that. So for MSP Open, we just do in person. We have all of our instructors usually form our judging teams. So you get judged by like high caliber talent that appreciate what you're trying to do and who know the hobby, which I think is important. So I'm also going to mix up this just pure up Vampire Pallor. Vampire Pallor is a good, if you're looking for Maggot White, it's similar. It's not quite the same, but it's very similar. But if I want an off-white to play with, and actually, Sidewinder, it does not have to be a Reaper Mini. We allow all models at our show. So you can enter Games Workshop if you want. We don't care. You can enter something you sculpted and 3D printed. We don't care. We'll judge it just the same. It's kind of the cool thing about Reaper. Like, when I first started at Reaper, I was coming from Games Workshop. Like, I had actually worked for GW. And GW really was, like, down hard on any other miniatures company. They didn't want to even admit they existed. Like, this is literally, like, if somebody brought a model from a different company to work, they got told to put it away or take it home. So when I went to Reaper, it was a refreshing breath of fresh air, because Reaper understands that the more companies are out there producing amazing models, the better for everybody in the industry. So, yes, it's in Texas. It is. It used to be at Reaper headquarters, but then it got just too big. So they built the Denton Convention Center, and we were one of the people championing that project with the Denton Town Board and Council. So we use the Denton Convention Center. So this is pretty thinned, and I might want to... I'll probably thicken this up a bit. This is the Grave Gloom. When you have some of these beautiful, delicate colors, they do tend to be a little translucent. There are a couple ways to deal with this. I could take the Vampire Pallor and I could just base coat everything with white and then go over the top of it. And that would give me, like, better coverage with the Grave Gloom. Over white is usually where these delicate colors can work. But yeah, I mean, Ed used to, like, and I don't know if he does this anymore, but back in the day when he actually had some time, if there was a local person or a non-local person who wanted to start their own miniatures company, they could call up and make an appointment with Ed, and Ed would sit down for a couple of days, and he would essentially take them through what it takes to run a successful miniatures company. He would show them our operation. He would talk about finance and accounting for it. He would, talk about the state of the industry, and show them, our mold making and our casting assembly line process. And Ed was it was just great. Like, if you wanted to get in, and, if he had time, he would probably still do that. I haven't seen him do it for a while, but that's just, like, that's enlightened is what that is. Is like, you're not afraid of competition because you do a great product, and that helping other people to get in is just going to give miniature painters another way to maybe discover miniature painting. Like, that's the cool. I always thought that was the coolest thing. So we're just, I'm using my base coating brush, which is kind of my crappy, it's not really a crappy, it's just not a Kolinsky. It's a Winsor & Newton sable. It is bigger, but it has a decent tip, so it can get the details. It just doesn't hold together quite as well. Like, this is kind of the difference between a Kolinsky sable and a regular sable or other brushes. Like, they all have their idiosyncrasies depending on the type of bristle, but the difference between a lower quality sable and a Kolinsky sable is, to me, how well the point holds together when you've got it loaded with paint and you're painting with it. This one, I have to stop. I have to reshape the tip if I'm doing something fine, like trying to get between areas without blorfing. Whereas with my Kolinskys, I would never have to stop and reshape the brush. Like, not nearly as, or if I did, it would be after a while of painting, and it wouldn't, be nearly as often as this. So that's kind of the difference between lower quality sable and higher quality sable. I think they sent an update Friday, didn't they, crew? They said that Australia was about 1/3 done, that Reaper had to reorganize the company for fire code stuff, reorganize the staging area. And Ed said that he thought it would take a couple days. I doubt they worked all weekend on it because people need breaks. Isn't it a cool green? I like it. And I think it works with the model really well. I haven't shaded it or anything yet. But yeah, I mean, expecting Reaper not to work the weekend restaging their area, I would expect that it would be, you know, they'd be working on it now. Good morning, Basement Forge. Yeah, the tentacles are pretty awesome. This is a cool mini. I've wanted to paint this mini since I first saw it. Great Bobby sculpt. Yeah, and Valandar has a point. Different brands of Kolinsky can make a difference. And that's grade 1 and grade 2 Kolinsky. Like, Kolinsky does have 2 grades, and they do vary. And you usually can tell with the price. If it's a Kolinsky Sable, but it's cheaper, that usually means you're getting a grade 2 brush, which is not, like, a bad brush by any means. And if you are used to really craptastic brushes, it's still a better bet for you to get your toe dipped in the water than not getting a Kolinsky Sable. But yeah, this one's just like, it's not as constructed as well. The hairs don't hold together as well. They don't, I'd have to try to do some real fine layering with it to see if I could do it. But I mean, with a brush, it's like holding together is a big thing. And some of these brush hairs are fraying a bit as well. Is that a skull? I can't tell if it's a skull. It could be a mushroom. There could be a mushroom right there. We might just treat it like a mushroom. Oh, good. That's good, Big Apple. Thanks for the update. But yeah, this fast palette is good. Remember, we're using a combination of 2 fast palettes here. So we're using mostly stuff from Gloom and Grave. And then 2 colors from Dark Reach. We are using Grave Gloom. This green that everybody likes is indeed from here. Death Knight Black, Grave Gloom, Necromancer Purple, and Vampire Pallor are all from this one. And then the other 2 that we're using from the other one, the Grave Gloom, the Dark Reach, is the Hellborn Red and the Troglodyte Tan, which are both very instrumental in doing our accent color, and also the Troglodyte Tan is really necessary for this bone color here. But you can see how well some of these colors just work together. Troglodyte Tan is very close to the tan that is in the Gloom and Grave set, the Gnawed Bone, but it was just a little bit warmer, and I thought it would give me a little bit more wiggle room as far as mixing. Usually, if you know you're going to be mixing colors, go for the more saturated and vibrant colors, because you can always mute a color, but you can't make it more saturated than it is if all you have to mix with it are other colors. So, other different colors. I'm just going to block in everything here, and then we'll go in and start applying some shading. I decided I wanted to do a base coat, then shade, then highlight. There's just a lot of tentacles here, and I want to get... We're going to be, I think, a little bit precise in like getting some shading in there. Then I'll figure out where I want to bring them up a little bit purple. I may actually make a couple of the tentacles like outright purple with our Necromancer Purple, just to mix it up once I start to see how this all looks. I don't know if that's a mushroom or not. It just kind of looks like one to me. Could be something different. It's all interpretive at this point. It could just be Bobby needed to fill that tentacle space in with something so it would cast, and so he decided a mushroom was a good thing to do. Though it could certainly be a stone as well. I just haven't looked at it. It was kind of round, though, so that's why I thought maybe a mushroom. It could also just be the top of a skull, and you could paint it that way. But I don't think it looks like that. It's kind of got pebbles around it. Yeah, it's hard to see. I mean, there's a lot of little detail. But yeah, this brush is definitely a base coating brush. This is not a brush you'd be able to do eyeballs with. It's just coming apart a little bit here. You can kind of see how it doesn't hold a great, see how it doesn't hold a perfect point? It still holds a pretty good, for base coating, this is cool, this is fine. And it's a good size for it, but it's not an eyeball or detail brush. It won't let you control the paint the way that a good Kolinsky will. So we're talking about brushes a lot today. Thought that it would be, we get a lot of questions on brushes, so. Yeah, it keeps like moderate, like it's like, it doesn't keep a perfect tip and you can see some fraying hairs already. Construction and quality. It's just you get with art supplies, and I learned this as a student in art school, you do get what you pay for generally. There are definitely some overpriced novelty things out there on the art market that you are overpaying for, but in general, with basic supplies, you get what you pay for. Basic supplies like, you know, your standard paints, your standard brushes. I see a little mold line that I kind of missed. I thought I got it, but now it's showing up. So let me get that real quick, guys. There. I don't know. I mean, I have ordered a lot of brushes in the last 2 weeks because I have, from all different areas, from Dick Blick, from Amazon, and from different companies on Amazon. And out of all of them, only one came without a tubule attached, and it was still wrapped up against cardboard in a plastic wrapper, so it didn't deform. Any good company that ships brushes is going to be a-okay with sending you a replacement. Like any yeah, there is a mushroom, I think, over here also, under here. I think these are mushrooms. Okay, so then I'm going to say mushroom confirmed because that appears to be a mushroom right there. So I never worry about ordering brushes for shadow because in general, I find that a good company like Blick or most shops on Amazon that are art supply places understand that since they're offering a guarantee, they're going to have to replace the brush if it's effed up, and that's like just a direct ding off their bottom line. So most places I find ship them okay. And if not, they replace it. So yeah, I don't fear that. I think out of all the years I have ordered brushes, I think I've gotten bums like twice. And this is at least like 24 brushes, so. This Winsor & Newton even came with, or one of the Winsor & Newtons I ordered came in the plastic tube alone, you know, so it was it had a really good protector for shipping. But yeah, it does vary with the company. You do always want to order brushes from somebody who offers the guarantee. Amazon generally offers the guarantee, and so does Dick Blick, and I haven't heard anything ever bad said about Blick's guarantee. Hello, Hagar. It's been a while. How are you doing? I think I tried to remove this mold line, but I'm still seeing little bits of it. Maybe that's just like the light, though. Maybe I'll try to put paint on it and see. We are getting some green onto our Necromancer dude quickly, and then we will do some shading. And a lot of this area that I'm kind of blocking in with green right now that's down under is going to go dark. I'm just putting a coat of paint on it to start it off. And if I can't tell what something is, I'm just going to hit it with green. Because while I'm shading it, I'm probably going to be able to judge like what it actually is, and I can always repaint it. I think that is a mushroom down there, though. But having one coat of paint on it is going to be good, because if you're taking a shadow and you're thinning it a lot, it's always nice to have a solid coat on bones first. So we're just using this as an all-over mid-tone for now. Why is he misguided? Or are you talking the cartoon character? I thought you were like, you know, impugning Hagar's own character. So as you can see, yeah, this brush doesn't want to keep a great point. It is a much cheaper. This is a $6 or $7 brush, I think. It's a sable, but it's just a cheaper sable. But this is also wear and tear that I'm saving. As long as this isn't frustrating to use, I'm okay using it, because this is, I'm saving wear and tear on my good brushes by using this for base coating. For scrunching the tip into all these little underlying areas, you know, that's abuse that I am not heaping onto my good brushes. So generally still a win in my opinion. You're misguided too, it's fine. Okay. So this is fairly thin paint. I am having to put a second coat on. It is sticking to the model fine though, you'll notice. With no primer. Whee! But yeah, I'm kind of happy that I've got all these different brushes to play with lately. Figure it out. David, my guy, always brings up the whole miniature painting is the only art form where people believe the only brush shape is a round. And in general, I am still using rounds. I'm just using different shapes and sizes and forms of round, but I do use flats on occasion for base coating things like dragon wings or big scaly monsters. I do like to have at least one flat around. Usually just a Tacklon flat, though, because it's almost always a base coat brush, so it's usually a Reaper. Reaper size 2 flat, or 4. I forgot which size I have on that one. This particular brush is definitely serving its purpose. So right now this looks like a lot of light bright green, but it is going to be downplayed once we start shading. So although it's not bad, it's not too distracting because it is not a super bright green, right? It is a little bit washed out. Yeah, makeup brushes, I mean, they're made to kind of blend and dry brush and do those techniques on skin, so I never have gone there. I generally stay within kind of standard shapes. Terrain is where I tend to branch out. I use a filbert sometimes for side brushing textures on terrain pieces. I have a couple of big filberts and flats for that. But in general on minis, unless like I said, I'm base coating big flat areas, I do tend to stick to a roundish shape. Just because I think it's well suited. Alright, tentacles. Gotta get this little guy that's holding the book open. Yeah. Definitely explore other shapes. Definitely. I definitely have a mold line here, speaking of definite things. There tend to be a lot of sneaky little mold lines on these tentacles, so if you care, just spend a moment when you notice one and take care of it. All right. See, and but that makes me kind of go that I don't think I'd use them for dry brushing, right? Because dry brushing is a brush wrecker. Like, if you're really doing dry brushing the way that it's supposed to be done, it wrecks brushes. So I don't know if I would buy more expensive brushes to dry brush with. I think I would stay cheap for that. Just my own personal opinion. any technique, I mean, that's why I decided I didn't want to do dry brushing when I was a baby painter, is because it wrecked brushes so much. Then eventually I learned how to do it, but it's still, I prefer my side brushing with wet paint, not trying to get it all off the brush and have it dry. 99 cents, yeah. Yep, cheap. If you're gonna dry brush, and I do dry brush on terrain. That's the one thing I do. But I use cheap brushes. I use like my old like student grade big canvas synthetics that, you know, at most were $3. Yeah, I use a cheaper brush for dry brushing because it is going to destroy it. Faster or slower, depending. And with dry brushing and how effective it is, it's not really about brush quality anyway. It tends to be more about your own utilization, like your own skill level in applying the paint and the paint consistency. So that's, I think, an area where going for a higher quality product doesn't make as much sense. Because usually a successful dry brushing job is because you've nailed your paint consistency, you've nailed how much paint goes on the brush. Oh, so got a little bit of grit there. And you're applying it well. So yeah, some people like it, some people don't. I mean, I'm just not a fan because my textures, I like to have a little more control. And everybody's gets, but like I said, I knew a guy when I was working at the game store who could do amazing dry brushing stuff. He had a lizard man army, and you had to look super close to tell it was dry brushed because he was using like dry brushing and layered washes and stuff, and it was just, they were beautiful models. So after I met him and saw his stuff, I never dissed dry brushing again because you can get very good at it, and it can be a really nice tool depending on the subject matter of what you're working on. That said, I will never, ever, with the exception of extremely large models, never will I endorse it on smooth skin tones. Not ever. It's not suited to it. Kathy Wapple did a great job on a huge bust, like almost life-size, where she did actually do a bunch of dry brushing on it. But at that point, you are a large enough scale that the texture, if you work it at cross purposes to itself, you can essentially work the texture in. Make it a feature instead of a problem. Good evening, Salad. I have done texture in many videos, Basement. You have watched many, like, videos. Maybe you haven't ever seen me do. I don't do a lot of texture on 28s because often they don't, like, lend themselves great to it. Like, I feel it's out of scale on a lot of them. But I know I've done texture on something. I mean, texture is just freehand. I certainly was doing, actually, this week's stream on my own channel, the Painting Big Twitch channel. Last week's stream, sorry, Thursday. We just did texture. Lurking while working. You're forgiven then. But how are you going to absorb all the wisdom then? Must absorb wisdom. As long as you're getting something out of it, Basement. That's all. I've done a couple of texture things also. I don't know if you're a patron, but if you are on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/paintingbig, I have talked about textures before. A couple of times. Mostly cloth texture. Don't think I've done a proper skin texture one yet. Now I am going to... Being able to do texture is just being able to master your brush control and paint consistency. If you have brush control and you have good knowledge of paint consistency, you can do textures. And you can start trying to do them even when you don't have both of those things. It's just you won't probably be very happy with your results until you start getting a real handle on it. The one thing about this model is all the mold lines on the tentacles. I keep having to go in with the knife when I notice one that I really am annoyed at. Alright, we're about ready to do our shading though. There we go, better. I think we've gotten all the tentacular goodness figured out. Reaper John, you're back! You're not buried. 23 months. It's going to be pretty silly when I have to sing you the double subiversary song, Reaper John. Given that you're Reaper. Technically, you should preempt this whole thing. Oh, is Quindy having some issues? Ah, Trash is doing the alternate Quindy. Oh, jumping on my Patreonic bandwagon? Yeah. Hey, if you want to, check it out. I always love to have more people, especially more Twitch friends. Come on over. Hopefully y'all get stuff out of it. I try, anyway. But yeah, so we've got a Reaper John today. Cool. Alright. Yeah, I think we'll stop there. We'll get us some shading real quick, and then everybody should be a forever student, Basement. I'm still a student. Like I just said, I'm about to switch up my painting style again. Because I want to try different stuff. I want to try really fast base coating like I did with Noel, but I want to do it on like a bunch of stuff, like 75s and everything. 75 millimeter. I've got a lot of very pretty 75 millimeter. I need to paint faster because I want to buy more pretty busts. if I'm going to buy more pretty busts, then I have to paint faster so I finish them faster. This is my agreement with myself. Speed starting. I don't want to paint everything fast because then it just wouldn't be enjoyable to me and I wouldn't like the result. But base coating, which typically, you know, the setup of a model, which typically takes a lot of time and is the most boring part. I feel like I had a lot of fun with that with Noli, and she is turning out well now that I'm going back in and spending time on her. But I want to actually control where I'm spending the time. And if I can put a very fast base, like blended base, so it has shadows, midtones, and highlights, just like Wapple does. A little bit different than Wapple, because I'm me, not Wapple. But, you know, it'll mean I save time on the base coating, still have time to do all the fun stuff that I really like with the detail work, and it'll probably mean that I paint faster overall, because I'm still going to be cutting a lot of time off of the initial stages. Paint consistency. Yeah, Loki. Yeah, if you are, I don't know if you're working with a well palette or a wet palette, but if you're working with a well, it should be pretty easy. My base coats are always like 4 to 5 drops of paint, 1 drop of water. And then everything else I started around a 2 to 1 paint to water. And I just thin it. I do a couple of test strokes and I thin it until I get it the way I want. But if it's base coating you're looking for, you almost always want a 4 or 5 drops of paint to 1 drop of water consistency with Master Series. With other paint companies, you may need to thin it just a little bit more. You know, I'm not as familiar with the Winsor & Newtons these days, Cybestorm. Hold on. I don't have any of the bus Rhymer. But I want to do the Ranger guy when they're available, when they get him in. I already painted one of them, guys, for Reaper, the lady with the little dragon. And I also used her as a Patreon subject for blonde hair and transparent cloth. So if you are on the Patreon, go find those. Those are from before I moved, so probably late 2019 or early 2020. But as far as, let me see what the Winsor Newton I just picked up is. Let's see here. It's a 00. Yeah, it's a more narrow brush. It's more like my Da Vinci. It's not a super... Sometimes what you'll get is the standard round, and then the company will also have something called a full belly round. So 3 different kinds of rounds, Cybstorm. There will be a standard round, and it's usually kind of midland. Like, even my Da Vinci Maestro Series 10 size 1, which is, you know, a standard round for Da Vinci, nonetheless isn't a terribly... So this is a Winsor & Newton on the right and a Da Vinci Maestro on the left. And they're both the standard round for these companies. So you can see, although the belly does have some width, and this is a size 00 for Winsor & Newton, is a size 1 for Da Vinci. So you can see the very, very large size differences between the lines. Then you've got, like I said, the tapered round, or what they'll call sometimes a fine point round. And those will have a big belly, but then they'll taper really extremely toward the end of the brush. You can see how it starts tapering a lot sooner on the left here. This is a Raphael 8408, which is their fine pointed round. Then you've got stuff like the full belly round, and that, I can't remember which companies offer it. But yeah, 0 and under are tapered. They're more like the Da Vinci, which actually I like. I like the 0 Winsor & Newton is actually equivalent to my Da Vinci, beloved Da Vinci Series 10 size 1. So I actually love that shape. I think it's the optimal shape for miniature painting in general. Like, if I could only have one brush, it would be the Da Vinci Series 10 size 1 or Winsor & Newton Series 7 size 0. But anyway, so there's like all those different shapes. So there's regular round, the fine tapered or fine pointed round, and then there's the full belly. And the full belly round is more like Mr. Fat Brush here. Mr. Fat Brush is very full. You can see he actually has a little bit of a bulge. Here, he's like, are you calling me fat? But you can see how full belly round will have more of a bulge coming out of the ferrule, just a little bit more width. And so that's essentially the difference in brush shapes. Do you guys get that? Yeah, the 04 is more of a standard or has a fuller belly round with a taper toward the tip at the end trash. The 8408 is the very narrow one that I tend to like better, but this is the 8404. So you can see the difference directly in the shape if you look at the tip. If you just hold the brushes with their tips equal and then just kind of put your finger up, see the long, narrow taper on the one and the more wedge-shaped tip on the other. That's the difference. 8404 is this one, the wedge shape, and 8408 is the very narrow tip. If you use a wet palette, then it's very difficult to nail your base coat consistency, low-key. This is a ceramic palette from Cheap Joe's Art Supply. It's actually got 28 wells. I use this for pretty much everything I do. I like to use the wet palette for fast painting out the gate sometimes, but if you are having trouble with paint consistency, I always advise that people try a well palette, because that way you can count the number of drops. And in time, low-key, after doing that for a little while, you'll get a sense of, okay, this should be my paint consistency, and then you'll be able to better reproduce it on the wet palette. So you don't have to stick with the well forever, although I have, because I love the control of the paint consistency that I get. But the wet palette and the well palette can work together, and this can give you a good instinctual grasp. Like, it can help you develop that gut instinct for paint consistency, because you can control it, then move over to the wet palette, and you're going to be a lot better with it. When I started wet palette, I was like, blarg. But then I started like thinking about more like, you know, paint consistency and just using it as a learning tool kind of thing. So get a good instinct for your paint consistency, then go back to your wet palette and experiment. But yeah, for all my, as I mentioned, I'm kind of moving to more of a wet palette start the model, but then I'm always going to go back to my well for finishing. All right, tubules. I must replace my my precious tubules here. Hold on. Can't leave a fresh brush without a tubule. You must have a tubule. Must protect the brush. Tubule in place. It's my special brush that I have to like break open at some point coming up. All right, where's my little tiny little new Winsor Newton? New fresh Winsor Newton also needs its tubule back. Fresh brushes. You love fresh brushes. You gotta. Hey, Lady Nim. Oh, Loki. Yeah. For a new painter, if you're going to pick up one brush, you probably want a smaller, on the smaller side brush rather than an on the bigger size. I would probably, the very lowest I would go would be this little guy, but I think probably the most utilitarian brush is going to be like a 1 or a 0, like Da Vinci or something similar, like what I was just showing. So like the 00 in the Winsor Newton Series 7 is similar to a 0 in Da Vinci. So I would tend to go like 0 or 00. Unless you're going to do the Da Vinci. I mean, then you could go with the size 1 like I have here because it's quite narrow. But these sizes are, I think, better if you're going to buy just a single expensive brush and keep it for eyeballs and detail work. I like these slightly larger ones over the smaller one like this, which is very, very, it's quite tiny. It's a 000 Da Vinci. Because these are more versatile. You could use slightly thicker paint with these and you'll still get good results. And you can use thinner paint with them and you'll get good results. Whereas these little tiny guys work best with really thin paint. And a beginner painter usually isn't going to be working with that. So I think something on the medium size, I would say a 0 or a 00. Unless you're going Da Vinci, then you can go to the 1 because Da Vinci 1 is actually a bit smaller. Does that make sense to you? No, I don't tend to do texture Pendrake. I just haven't. I mean, I probably don't have it here. Oh, I almost had it. I don't remember. I tend not to do it because, as I mentioned, it's not lifelike. It's not in scale, and that tends to bother me. I mean, if you want to be fair about it, I mean, I did a little tiny bit of suggesting texture on this guy's little hanging things. Yeah, that makes sense, Fluffy? Yeah, good. Yeah, you don't want super tiny because super tiny, if you're using thicker paint, it tends to dry on the brush faster. And then that just gets frustrating. You do want to thin your paint a little bit, though, when you're working with these brushes. Just a little. Like I said, even my base coats I thin a little bit. So, all right, let's get our shadows blocked in. Oh, wait, it's time to stretch. Let's stretch and then put our shadows in. So we got Mr. Dude here. Let's focus on Mr. Dude so you guys can stare at him while I do my stuff. I don't know, there. Perfect. And then we'll come back and we'll do our shading and a little bit of highlighting and stuff like that. This is the brush episode. I have officially named it the brush episode. But yeah, Penric, I don't even know. Like, I probably did texture on some of the bigger stuff. Because bigger stuff makes sense to me. Just looking at some of this. But I mean, mostly I really feel like I've done some texture probably on leather wrappings or stuff before. I don't know. Maybe not. But yeah, for most 28s, I don't feel that cloth texture is, makes sense. Because if you were looking at somebody at that size, it'd be somebody like, you'd have to look at a human like all across a parking lot, right? And then that human would be the size in your eyes of a miniature that you were holding right here. And can you see any texture? No, you can't. Not unless the texture is super strong, like there's a pebbly rock or something. Then you can see. But yeah, like I said, bigger. So yes, we did fur texture on Sphinx, but I don't count her as a 28 millimeter humanoid. Like, Sphinxy is, yes, she's at that scale, but she's bigger. Like, when I say 28 millimeter texture, I'm usually talking a 28 millimeter figure. Sphinxy is, Monsters is where it's all off. If you measure Sphinxy from her paws to her top, she is about a 42 millimeter. And she's larger in, like, she's a monster, right? Monsters just are different. They're a different beast, haha, literally. But if you look at any 28 millimeter humanoids I've done, Pendrake, you likely will find zero texture. I show how to do it on my Patreon. I talk about cloth texture at 28. There's a video on it. But it's very, I mean, you have to be very, very fine with it. And so you can do it. I mean, I just don't like it because I find that it doesn't really make sense for me. But, you know, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Alright, I'm going to go and do my floor exercise. I'll be right back and we can go back. Sphinxie is a 28 millimeter scale, but she is a larger figure. Now, if you have a cat person, actually, technically, Grumpy Cat had texture. She had fur texture on her face. So fur texture, yes. Because usually if you're going to have patterns, and the reason is that usually if you're going to have any fur patterns on a piece that's 28, you need to at least suggest the texture or it looks bad. It looks like a plastic toy. But I don't think of Sphinxie, I don't think of models like Sphinxie as 28 because they are larger. They may be that scale, but I tend to paint them differently. Mostly with me, it seems to be if I have the room to do the detail, I will do the detail. But if I don't have a lot of room and I don't think it'll make sense, then I won't do it. All right, shading. But I would say Grumpy Cat is probably the example. A better example than Sphinx, who is actually 42 millimeters. But Grumpy Cat is 28, and she does have fur texture on her face. What do I want? I want crappy brush. Does that make sense? I mean, everybody's likes and dislikes are going to be purely individualistic. And if you guys want to do texture on a 28 millimeter human figure, do it. Who cares? Who's going to call you on it? Not me. It's going to be all you. Your paint job. Your paint style. I'm just going to do what I want to do on my minis. So, and I usually have a reason for it. Sometimes it's a cockeyed reason. But that's true of any of us. Why do any of us do what we do? You know what? I was going to use my kind of not great brush, but I think actually when it comes to these outer tentacles, I'm going to go to a better brush. But I am going to use this to block in shadows on the undersides in these deep areas. And I'm actually going to grab some Death Knight Black also to darken those shadows back there so that we can bring out more detail. Bring in our shadows. I'm going to just generally paint shadows on the undersides as well. I'm not going to overthink it or spend too much time on it. Mostly I just want to darken in some of these areas that are underneath or on the interior. And I'm using a mixture of my Grave Gloom green and my Death Knight black. So I'm kind of mixing them together here, you can see, to get darker shadows. Let me get a little bit more in focus here. Ah! Sure, it's better practice, but I'm human, and I'm going to screw it up. I always think that scale's kind of a crapshoot anyway, because there has been such scale creep in our hobby. At this point at 28, some 28mm models are more like 35. So I tend to just like call it by its size. But when you say, we didn't, for instance, I don't know that we used the word scale. So when you say 28mm model, you could mean either. It can get very confusing. But I think the bottom line is, for me, is it bigger? Do I feel like I can do texture effectively? And is it so out of scale that it's going to bother me? And if I can answer those questions in such a way as it makes texture make sense, then I'll do it. Yeah, size is kind of how I work it. Like, because like I said, it's like nowadays, like, you've got all these like 40mm models that people are kind of painting like 28s, and it used to be 25 instead of 28. And so it's like, what you gonna do? Pretty much just paint it how you see it, folks. If you want to, like I said, if you want to do texture, do texture. I'll do some texture on these tentacles because I can. They're big enough that I feel like I can. And I can make them have little sections on them, just like up here. Actually, we just did texture on the dagger, or the handle of Lizette's sword. I just suggested a bit of cord texture there. So... But these days, I really feel like a model should be a little larger. If I'm talking texture like cloth, like a linen texture or a wool texture or things like that, I tend to not do it if it's 28mm or smaller. Alright, so these are difficult, these tentacles. I'm going to bring in a little bit of our mix, but it's not as strong as I wanted it to be, so I may have to go straight to Death Knight. And kind of bring in these lines and then worry about shading them instead of the other way around. But yeah, we all have, I mean, let's face it, we're gamers. We all have opinionated points. And for me, it's like texture is more of my, I like it better on bigger minis. But yeah, I want to paint that Elven Ranger bust from Julie because that's one we can do a bunch of texture on, so it'll be fun. And we can, you know, really get into it. So like 25mm Nomedzic? I am totally opinionated. Often I am also right, but not all the time. Mostly I'm just opinionated. However, I know this about myself, so... That said, I am totally willing to compromise and change my mindset. If it is warranted. Alright, more tentacles. Yeah, it's almost time to switch back to a brush with an actual tip. About, yeah, 25s. 25s can be fine. I mean, it depends on how complicated the figures are, right? How much tiny detail they've got. Tiny detail on 25 can get really hard to paint sometimes. Alright, yeah, I'm gonna do a couple more heavy shadows, then I'm gonna move to a finer brush. Because this one is just not good enough to get good details. So Mr. Not a very good Kolinsky sable is just not enabling us to get as much tightness or detail. It's okay for roughing, but it's not great for anything else. I'm gonna shadow in these guys on the underside of the book, because there would be a shadow there. There. Now the nice thing about this crappy brush is that I can sit here and like abuse it and not care. So doing some general blocking and getting some random shading on stuff, it's good for that. It's making things stand out a little better. Yeah, I know what he meant. I don't find it, like, I guess it's just, I mean, I get Ed on the subject of scale sometime. He'll tell you stories, like the scale creep. I mean, Reaper used to, like, have people complain that all our models weren't exactly 25 millimeter, and Ed pointed out that not all humans are 6 feet tall, so, you know. Scale is such a loaded topic in this industry, and or it used to be. Maybe it's not as much now. But I am much more likely to talk about size than scale, because I find that a scale means so many different things. Like, sometimes for some models, it has a direct impact on, like, the detail of the model, and sometimes it doesn't, and just can get really wound up and kind of convoluted. So I'm more likely to talk about how big is the mini, because I do tend to use techniques like textures that I would use on, like, busts and large scale minis on just bigger minis, like monsters. In fact, I tell you guys to do that all the time if you paid attention. I've mentioned, you know, before this that, you know, oh, and if you want to do this, you know, on a model, it might not work great on a 28 millimeter model, but it'll work great on a monster, right? So when I'm talking about 28 at that point, it is definitely like sizing. And I would go so far as to say that these days, I never use the word, like, when I use 28 millimeter, I'm never talking about scale. Like, now that Pendrake has drawn my attention to this. Like, I am always talking about size, I think. Because I change my techniques depending on size, not scale. Yeah, Grey Mouser. Yeah, exactly. HM Road Dog is, like, totally got it. Yeah, back in the day, it meant to the eyes. Or it went to the top of the head, and then it meant to the eyes, right? So then everything grew by a few millimeters, and that's when you got 28 millimeter, when people started using to the eyes instead of the top of the head. It's just all crazy. And it's, you know, I am with Ed. Just, you know, humans are different sizes in real life, and they could vary by quite a bit. So having a model that varies by 5 millimeters next to another model, it's just that model is taller. It's just funny how silly. Like, it's just, it has been, there have been wars over it. I mean, yeah, and mostly wargaming, you're right, but people get very uppity about their scale, or they used to. I think I'm just gonna, like, go and talk about, like, the size of the model. I think that makes the most sense for me. All right. Yeah. I never got into those except for 1/6, 1/10, 1/12. Like, I've adapted to using those scales for busts, HM Road Dog, because that's how they're sold, right? Robin, thank you. 19 months. Thanks for the resub. Super fantastic. Yeah, Karu, for sure. Yeah, but then I got totally, like, 1/72 is, like, 28 millimeter, right? I don't remember. Like, I never really took to those because it involved math. But yeah, I've gotten used to it with busts just because most busts are 1/10 scale, but I've also worked on a 1/12 scale. So since I've worked on those scales, I have more of an idea. And I've worked on a 1/6 scale. That was Soldier. Never measured the height. No. I'm moving back to my my good Da Vinci brush now, guys, so I can do finer lining. No, not at all, Pendrake. These are tentacles. These are not going to be smoke. They're solid. I'm just shading them. I'm shading them, and I'm trying to like get their little details in, and trying to. At this point, I'm moving over to Death Knight Black in order to separate them out. So when I've got a couple of them curled together, I want to be able to separate them out. Like these guys are curled together. So I want to be able to line now, line and shade. And the other brush, the not so good brush, was not good enough to block in some of this stuff. This brush keeps a perfect tip, and so as you can see, it's much easier to get the precision. But yeah, I want these to be real tentacles. I'm just right now trying to get in some basic shading on them. I didn't ever want them to just stay bright green. Right, exactly, again. Yeah, I don't mind a little bit of scale variance in models on the tabletop at all. Or, sorry, height variance. But no, since I just did Genie's Clouds, I don't want to do the same thing on another model. Doesn't make sense. There are a lot of tentacles here, however, so it is taking us a while. So with this brush, because it has a much better tip, and it keeps that tip no matter what, I'm able to get these fine lines in. You can see the difference between the quality at that point, between a $6 or $7 brush and essentially a $15 brush. Just very well made. It's going to be more responsive. It's going to hit a finer level of detail because it sticks together. It's the difference between what you can do with a kind of crappy sable or a mid-grade sable and a really fine grade sable. High grade sable. I see. Nomad Zeke. Are the Joan of Arc... I saw the Joan of Arc stuff. Is it smaller or bigger? They're somewhat consistent, Pendrake. Although I did discover a 1/10 bust, quote unquote, that was much more like a 1/12. So smaller. Kind of glad I didn't go in on that Kickstarter then. I liked the sculpts, but as everybody knows, I like big models and I cannot lie. So now we're tightening up stuff over here. That's what we're trying to do. We're bringing in tighter shadows. We're lining around the tentacles. If I get a line and I don't want it to be super sharp and cartoony like this, I'll essentially take some of my mixture, some of this, and I'll run it over the top of that in a second after I've got these mapped in. Yeah, some of the models looked beautiful. But these days, I'm really making Kickstarters fight for my love. Like, I've got so many beautiful models already. There is one that's taunting me right now, and I've only got about 48 hours left to figure out if I'm going to actually invest in it. I may yet resist it. Essentially, if my brain doesn't remind me to look at it in its last hours, I'll forget, and then I'll be okay. I'll be safe. I'll be safe from the Kickstarter. It's one that my enablement channel, I mean my supplies talk channel in my Discord brought up. Thanks. Thanks, enabling people. That is why my personal stream and my Patreon is called Painting Big, Pendrake, because I prefer large size stuff. Like I told David last night, he's like, well, what, you'd never use that, because he saw the giant brush, and he's like, you would never use that gigantic brush on a 28mm model. And I'm like, nope. But then when do I paint 28s anymore except for Reaper? And I don't. I really, I'm not even attracted to 28s in general when I look at models to paint. Like, what I like to paint in my own time is very much bigger. I like big stuff. So we got some... I have painted a Pathfinder Gobbo for David's lighting class when I audited his lighting class because I was waiting for him to get out of class so that we could go out to lunch at Kubla. So I took his class. And that was okay because that was very speed painty because it was mostly about OSL. But for my own personal enjoyment, no. I think the last model I wanted to paint that was a 28 that wasn't for Reaper was when we were playing a little bit of Gloomhaven, and so I painted my character. David does like to paint 28 still. He enjoys it, but he also paints a lot of big stuff. So when he goes and paints 28, it's often as a break from working on big projects. And I think that's very useful. If you get burned out, try switching up your scale. It really has worked for me in the past. There we go. We've got some nice definition here. Fairy cavalry. Nice. Yeah, for sure, Eladin. I mean, that's the pleasure of Kickstarter, right? Is that you can help somebody bring their dream to life and make it available to other people, even if it's like kind of a niche product or kind of weird. If you like it, then it's a win-win. Because, yeah, there's certainly some models that a lot of people say they would love to see, but that are just kind of a little weird or niche, and so a big company isn't usually going to invest in it because they won't sell enough. But it's why you don't see some character class and race combinations coming from bigger companies. If it's not, like, as popular, they may choose not to do the variant. That's why I'm happy that we do the half-orc wizard. Because she's awesome. She's not like a standard, like something that you would usually see. But she's a fantastic character. So sometimes Reaper will take a chance on it, put out something that's maybe a little niche, and as long as you guys love it, then maybe more stuff like that will happen, right? So that's why I'm encouraging people to buy that half-orc wizard, because if half-orcs start selling, then we'll get more of them. A wild John appeared? Yeah. Ah, I see. The crystal shard person girl. I don't remember what. We haven't played for a while, so I've forgotten all the class names. I see a mold line, and I'm going to kill it. There. I think somebody actually already asked. Oh, there we go. Good. John has got an update ready to go. Fantastic. That's because John is awesome. Hey, and it is actually time to wrap up our little stream here. So let me just finish painting in this little tentacle. Touching it up where I took its little mold line off. And then we can recap a whole bunch of stuff that we talked about today. And it was a whole bunch of useful stuff, too. So if you're only just tuning in, or you stopped in to see if John was going to reveal all about the Kickstarter, we did a lot of talk about brushes today. So if you are interested in brushes, what brush might be most useful? If you're going to buy a really good brush, so what's the most useful size for you to get as a beginner? How do different brush series and shapes vary? We did a lot of talking about that today. So if you are interested in that topic, do go back and watch the VOD once it is up. Otherwise, most of what we did today, we talked a little bit about how different paints change when you mix them together depending on like what kind of paint they are. Like lighter, more delicate greens like this tend to react very heavily when you add even a little bit of black to them. Whereas really translucent colors like this beautiful Necromancer purple, which actually is quite dark and transparent, when you add even a tiny bit of white to them, then those transform pretty heavily as well. So we talked a bit about that as stuff like that, and then we were outlining tentacles. We talked a bit about scale versus size and how confusing it is in today's miniatures reality. And Pendrake wants me to be more precise in my speech, so I will make the attempt. But pretty much I think I'm just going to go to talking about size and not talking about scale at all. I get in less trouble. And we did a lot of shading on our tentacles today, both with straight up Death Knight Black, which is a liner color with some blue and violet in it, and by mixing it into our greens a bit so that we could get a variance and a softer shadow on some areas. But mostly I'm trying to get shading and kind of separating out our tentacles done today so that we could work on highlights next time. All right, I think we're good. Are we going to raid somebody today, John? Or are you going to do an update, like live update? And swap over to like Reaper channel. Reaper Warehouse channel. There we go. Justin got it. Alrighty. So there you go, guys. That was our day working on the Crimson Herald. Tomorrow is Wyvern Day. Wyvern Day. Remember, we were working on scales. We're going to be doing a lot of red scales tomorrow. So that will be exciting. Our Wyvern is getting very, very much more close to done. So pretty soon we'll have to... pretty soon we were going to have to... this Wyvern! Rawr! This Wyvern. Julie Guthrie sculpt. So we'll be working on him, finishing up as many red scales as we can get. He's getting very, very close. So we'll have to choose another color, or another model, sorry, soon to replace our Wyvern. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope you have an excellent day. I'm going to go and do my grocery store run. I will be back here again tomorrow, same bat time, same bat channel. And yeah, I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thanks, John, for running the show. And Justin, I hope you feel better. Bye-bye.